Okay, so welcome to the PAC's podcast on July the 27th. 27th, yeah, 2020. I'm Tristan, here with my co-hosts Nick and Lauren. And Nick has brought on board our distinguished guest, Barry Castagnola, who is, I'm afraid I don't know much about your work, but I've heard comedy and like various events and stuff and various TV programs.
Yeah, I mean, not distinguished. I wouldn't say distinguished, but but yeah, no, I'm a comic and writer and producer as well. So yeah, been sort of working in comedy for the last 20 odd years.
Okay, cool.
Indeed. Is that the mainstay of your work, Barry?
It is, yeah. So well, I mean, sort of a mixture of, in the last few years, a mixture of producing and writing and performing, but recently, obviously, less of the performing.
Yeah, but obviously, I presume lockdown has given you a massive vantage point in being able to write continually.
Yeah, because that's what happens. Yeah, that's what you do. You think the world's exploding and the economy's in tatters. So you sit there going, "Oh, right, might be a good time to write some funny stuff." No, but I've been. I think probably like with everyone, you set off at the beginning of lockdown with grand ideas of all the things you're going to do and actually what a great opportunity it is. And I'll be honest, for the first month and a half. I actually quite enjoyed it. I mean, obviously there was a sense of impending doom, but I actually quite enjoyed it because before then I've been traveling, doing gigs anywhere between 5 nights a week, sometimes 2 or 3 nights a week, and working in an office on a mixture of stuff, like been doing some Radio 4 stuff and the odd sort of like a video for a charity or an organisation or a company, and just not having, not having a lot of time. So it was quite nice to just sort of reset a bit actually. And I've been producing a podcast for Rod Gilbert, the Welsh comedian, and his wife.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's been taking up quite a bit of time. So it was nice that came along at a time when I could do it remotely as well, like as we are now, finding it quite easy to get some quite good guests and that's been so we've done about 8 episodes of that now, so that's been good.
That's interesting. Yeah, you're doing a podcast. It's interesting because I guess like with us, although I think that obviously live events in person are really important, it's good. The one good thing that could come out of the whole coronavirus thing would be if we could get a balance between being able to use Zoom and stuff when it's necessary, or even just when it's convenient. Talk to someone far away. Also, to be able to have live events in person. I mean, they're both important, I think.
Yeah, and actually, I think across the board in every industry, people will realise that there were certain times where they didn't have to meet and will be able to do stuff online. And to be honest, for the podcast we've been doing, it really. We sort of record locally and then sync everything up, and it sounds like it could be in the same studio anyway, and it saves a lot of hassle. Whereas before, we'd always think. I used to co-host when Rod and his wife did a BBC Wales radio show, regular Saturday morning. I used to co-host that quite a bit, and even though they'd made it as convenient as possible in that they had an ISDN line in the house, so they'd be able to do their part of the presenting from his house, and then it was the people in Cardiff in the studio would do the producing and the driving it out the desk and and onto the BBC airwaves, but even that I always have to go up to North London and go to his place to do it. Whereas I do think, in all those meetings, I remember once for a corporate gig getting flown out to Geneva for one meeting where we sat awkwardly, where they were asking me what I was going to do for this awful corporate, and I'm trying to think on my feet, and I just had this stuttering, awful meeting. And I thought I'd just flown for Geneva. Do you know what I mean? For this one meeting, things like that clearly could be done. And actually, I think it can be more because it's easier to sort out and it's harder to wriggle out of as well. Like one example, I'm working at the moment. We're doing a Radio 4 comedy series called Unite, and it's we did a pilot that went out as part of the Comedy Playhouse season went out in December, and it's basically a sitcom with Mark Steele, the activist, comedian, writer, his son Elliot. We got Claire Skinner, the mum from Outnumbered, plays Mark Steele's partner, and Ivo Graham, who's a brilliant comic. And it's about a sort of working class, middle class sort of family getting together, like Mark Steele and his son, and he falls in love with this upper middle class woman. And her son's Ivo Graham, who's this Eton educated Oxbridge son. So it's this sort of the dynamics of this odd couple, two odd couples, if you like, the two stepbrothers and the mum and the dad. Anyway, we sort of were team writing it, right? So it was an idea that I had initially, and then we wrote the pilot script between the myself, Mark, Ivo, and Elliot. And trying to get everyone to our office in Wandsworth or meet somewhere in town and sit and have coffees. Quite often one person couldn't make it, or there's something on it. Couldn't give up 4 or 5 hours. We've been having regular meetings on a Tuesday for like 2 hours or an hour and a half, 2 hours, and we've kept it regular every Tuesday. And we're probably a further stage creatively with it than we would have been if we were trying to meet once and then someone make an excuse and not being able to make it. We'll do it next week. And so I think it can be in some ways.
Our meetings. Basically, until we had the whole situation with coronavirus, we weren't really doing meetings regularly. But then Lauren's joined the team, and we're not, to make it clear, we're not a strict organisation. We're like a collective of artists that want to better like people through the arts and through psychology and sort of exploring everything in society through the media and stuff and media.
Right.
But when we started doing stuff on Zoom more, we ended up actually having meetings regularly. Now we get both in person and Zoom. It's actually much better. So I think there's a possibility you can use that situation to your advantage as long as it isn't. As long as you don't end up either only doing stuff on Zoom or only doing things in person. It has to be a balance.
It's the gift of the technology because you can reduce all the kerfuffle of people having to all meet in the same place at the same time.
Like you say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And who needs all that when you can just do it?
Never have your meetings in pubs. Never have your meetings in pubs.
I do think as well that with comedy, it's interesting to see like the different attempts since lockdown of viral sort of online video comedy and who's done sort of doing it well and who's not. So you've got someone like Alex Horne who's been doing Taskmaster. I haven't really seen much of it, but I know they've been doing it. It's been quite successful with people doing home tasks. Now that feels like it's I'm saying this, having not really seen much of it, but I know it's been happening. I know it's been popular. But you sort of think that's an interactive way of an extension of something that people know, a TV show that's well liked by a lot of people. Whereas you range from that and people doing, and like the Stand Comedy Club were running gigs on Saturday nights. Where they could originally from the Stand, but without an audience, but it was like sort of free cameras, almost shot like a really professional affair. So then people doing gigs on Zoom that again have ranged from, but then it's a tricky one to know how to play it as a performer, because I've seen people sort of standing up and doing it like holding a microphone and doing it as if they're doing it stood up, but that feels weird.
The trouble with a lot of doing a lot of stuff on Zoom, because I'm part of the comedy collective.
Yeah.
And you get the acts go up there, but it's the whole act is interaction. You need to interact with the audience. You need to see who's the weakest, the weak points, and who you can sort of bring into the conversation and stuff, and which you don't get. So it's kind of pretty much gag based now at the moment, where there's not this one-on-one scenario.
And also, we've had a struggle. Like, for example, we've done the video forums, and we've tried to get people. We did these like video forums in place of an open mic, and we started doing both now. Basically, again, it's just a bit more open now. You know what I mean? But like, we were doing it just on video, and it's been really good for some people. But the part that's difficult is, for example, sometimes we have one of our friends plays like the rap basically, and he tried to do a rap, while he was playing his song through his speakers, and it just couldn't get both signals. It didn't work.
Right.
No, it cuts out audience design, doesn't it? So to not speak, but because I did like again, you got to pay the bills how you can, but I did a sort of a corporate quiz, like I had to put together and present an hour and a half thing for a company called Moodle, who are like an e-learning company. They provide platforms for like Open University and all that sort of stuff. And it was like an international audience, and we had a music intros round. And first, when we tried rehearsing it and doing it to a sort of smaller audience, to do a run through, and your timing's all out as well. Everything, it's sort of, there's that slight delay, so it is difficult with music.
It makes it impossible to do music
So Barry, what were your comedy influences growing up? What were the sort of things that you thought, actually, I want to do this, I want to get involved in this game?
Yeah, I suppose a mixture of like, a lot of people always think that performers in general and particularly stand-ups have got some sort of dark past and this need to be loved, and that might be the case with some comics. I think it's interestingly that there seems to be a sort of disproportionate amount of comedians who were adopted. So I do think there's something in that with a certain group of comics, but there's also a few who just quite enjoyed, who just show offs, you know what I mean? Like just enjoyed having a laugh and enjoyed being the clown at school or whatever. And I was always drawn more to comedy. I remember even doing like in primary school, doing an end of year thing and doing a sketch, a Monty Python sketch, doing the cheese shop. And the bookshop. There's a bookshop one as well. I was just trying to find something to do with the Gobi Desert with a spoon. I just really liked that sort of, quite like Monty Python. Always been a huge fan of Peter Cook's stuff.
Of course, brilliant.
Absolutely, just brilliant. So I remember years ago, like watching things like The Secret Policeman's Ball. I remember, watching that and watching, within that you had Billy Connolly, you had Peter Cook doing his. Doing a sort of satire as a judge on Jeremy Thorpe, so I was always sort of drawn to comedy. I used to do like school plays and stuff, and always like doing the more sort of comedy stuff. But comics wise, just like everyone, I think when I was younger, the first stand up, actual proper full on stand up things I watched were it's a weird mix really, because like Eddie Murphy, Raw and Delirious, which I think everyone watched, and looking back now, it's amazing. He was like 21, I think, or something, 21 or 22 when he did the Delirious.
It was like a firestorm. It was like a firestorm on that stage. He owned it completely. You were mesmerised by him.
Extraordinary. But then also there were people like I always quite like the sort of storytelling of Billy Connolly, and I did quite like Ben Elton as well, and I loved The Young Ones, and I loved so I loved that sort of anarchic silly stuff. And I think probably
Blackadder, when he got on board with the Blackadder crew, it just transformed it, I thought.
So I think an element of the things psychedelic that I did, the one sort of the thing that I'm probably most proud of and most enjoyed doing, and when we had our own BBC series and stuff, and it was that there was probably influences, even though it's totally different, but of that sort of slightly anarchic and just trying to push it as far as we could in terms of the style of it and what we get away with as well.
Well, this is the one something I wanted to ask them. Would you feel like, so obviously comedy strong psychological element, and psychology is like just something we often think about, and so I was wondering, do you feel any comedians have or could exploit or use, let's just say in a positive way, or maybe just in any way, the COVID situation? Have you heard about anyone doing that, either in a nasty way or in a good way, like using it for comedy and making that be a statement about that?
About COVID in itself. Well, I mean, I suppose when you're friends with a lot of comics on Facebook, there's been, I'd say mostly, to be honest with you, there's been more comment and anger at the government's, rather than, I've seen odd jokes. Someone was making a joke about face coverings. There might be the odd sort of topical joke that someone would do about anything that might be in the news. But it'll be, and I noticed, for example, there's a comedian called Joey Page who was filming his Next Up. This Next Up is a streaming subscription service for UK comedy, and he was filming a show for them, and it was the night where Boris Johnson came out and said, so it was the week before the lockdown when they put it on the venues at that point. They were hoping to get away with not telling people to actually shut down by going, it's up to you, but hey, everyone, don't go there, so he only had about 25 people turn up for this DVD recording, and then they recorded it anyway, and I think they've now relabeled it as Last Night Before Lockdown or something like that, and making something of it. So it'll be interesting. There's bound to be, because obviously there haven't been many gigs, and they're only just starting. I've actually got a couple next week. First gigs I've done in ages, and there's, you know, there will obviously be, it'll be interesting to the point where an audience might get a bit weary of it. You know, if everyone is doing 5 or 10 minutes on, you know, on COVID and coronavirus, where people have wanted to go out and escape. It's like when Brexit was happening, like such important issues and things that do need to be talked about. But sometimes someone will have a great take on a topical subject, where it could be Black Lives Matter, it could be Brexit, it could be whatever the big topic is, and have an interesting take on it. But quite often you might see 3 comics have a real average, like low hanging fruit, the most obvious joke you can think of, and there's nothing worse when you don't realise you were the 3rd one that night.
yeah.
You turned up somewhere and you go, "Oh, I've got something topical. I've heard the news tonight." And then you go, "Oh, that deserves more of a laugh." And you go, "Yeah, a third person do a variation of that joke." So it'll be interesting to see what sort of percentage of people's of comedians' set is COVID related. You know.
So let's talk a little bit about political correctness in comedy. Obviously, harking back to the sort of Stan Boardman days and Bernard Manning days of comedy, which are now completely alien to us. There is yet another evolution of comedy which is happening, where obviously the Little Britain thing, Matt Lucas and David Walliams got a lot of flack for basically portraying every element of society they can. Do you think that was a justified point or not?
Well, I think here's the issue with that. I would agree with you on the one hand that that you could, and I'm sure they would say, and the creators of the show would say. Here's another way looking at it. If you had 2 white men make a show about every part of every character in Britain, not every character in Britain, but all parts of Britain, and all of those characters are grotesque to an extent. They're looking at posh people. You can't just say they're only punching down. You go, look, they're also doing these sort of posh characters, middle class characters, and they're just doing types. Then what would the reaction be if every single one of those characters was male and white? Now, you know, so on the one hand, I would go, it's patronising and offensive in a sense to not be portraying any ethnic minority. Those minorities are a massive part of the fabric of our country. So in a sense, you go, if they hadn't have done it, there's something quite almost racist about that, and you can certainly be accused of, what's this show all white? But the other point is, it's the historical connotations with blacking up, unfortunately, are such that as a white person, it's not for us to make that decision. And if people are offended, I mean, again, I saw a black friend of mine on Facebook. I saw him ask the question and go, "Are any of my BAME friends, is anyone actually bothered by this?" And the string of comments I saw anecdotally on that one post were going, "Not at all. They take the piss out of everyone," that was their point. However, if there's one, if there's one or more people who go, "I find that genuinely offensive," right? Then it's a tricky one. It's a similar argument. I'm a Spurs supporter of the football club Tottenham Hotspur. They're a traditionally Jewish club. Now they used to have other fans taunt them and call them yids, and
they used to call themselves yids, though, didn't they?
No. This is what I'm saying. It started from abuse from opposing fans. And then essentially the Spurs fans reclaimed the word, in a similar vein. It's very, very different because actually not all Spurs supporters are Jewish, but in a similar vein to black people reclaiming the N-word. But you go, so it's used at games positively as pro Spurs, pro Jewish, right? Traditionally Jewish club, and there are lots of Jewish fans, but it's not all Jewish fans. Everyone's doing it in a positive way now. David Baddiel, who doesn't support Tottenham, is a Chelsea supporter, is saying, "I'm Jewish and I find the word offensive and I don't think anyone should be using it." Then you go, "Oh, then it's now it is an issue." So it's a real tricky one.
It is.
The answer. What do you boys think?
Well, I mean, I think personally, the way I look at it is, it's a lot of the time is not up to members of like one group to decide what's offensive to another group. That's the way I look at it. It should really be if black people or Asian people or someone who a minority in this country still. If they come out and say, I find something offensive and it actually is going to cause harm to me, then I understand that, I respect it. But what I don't respect as much is white people, in this case, let's say, trying to be do-gooders and trying to like ban various comedies about, you know, things because they think it might offend people without even asking those people if they are offended. It's not up to people who are already part of the elite to make those decisions. It should be down to the common people and people who have that, and people who have an interest who are part of that community, I think.
See, if you remember a comedy series called Goodness Gracious Me, that was absolutely genius because they actually lampooned the whole of their own Indian culture. Well, and also the Indian culture within England, and they would take the piss out of the English as well. There was a sketch where they were going out for an English rather than going out for an Indian. And I think it's got to be a two-way street, isn't it? It has got to be a two-way street. I was a bit appalled that they took the Germans episode out of Fawlty Towers from Netflix.
Oh, they pulled it.
But that again wasn't the choice of, I'm sure, the choice of black or Asian people. Nothing to do with them. And that again was someone at the top. Most likely no. Most likely some white English person who didn't. I don't know. I don't want to pass judgment on anyone, but I don't think it was a wise decision.
Well, I saw an interesting article the other day in the paper, and it was Ricky Gervais talking about The Office, which he won an Emmy for, him and Stephen Merchant, and that came out in 2001. But he was saying if that came out now, there's no way that would have been allowed.
Is that because it's like sexist?
Because he said no. It's more about there are racist jokes and sexist jokes actually. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I thought.
But he said the thing is now with comedy is that it's almost like there's a complete loss of the sense of irony, and people can only take things from face value now.
That's Facebook for you.
And it's like so if someone tells a racist joke and you it on a TV show, are you saying that as a writer you agree, or are you taking the piss out of the guy telling the joke?
Exactly.
Well, this is the point. It often comes down to intent, or should always in a way come down to intent. But sometimes you go, how do you know what that intent is? So I can remember Jim Davidson moaning years ago saying, hang on a minute, what about Ali G? He's doing what I used to do when I used to do my chalky voice, which is like he used to put on this sort of Jamaican accent and do a character called Chalky. So he's pointing at Ali G and going, how come he's allowed to do that? And there are reasons why they're very different. But you can slightly understand Jim Davidson, who's not as educated, not as is stuck in his own ways, almost going, he's doing the same thing as me. How come everyone had to go at me? And I think he was genuinely questioning it. Now I don't think he was right. I'm saying, but I think he was going, hang on a minute. And again, with Ali G, you could go. Someone could say, hang on a minute, what is that character doing? But I always saw that character personally as either a white character or
a wigger,
or an Asian character, even like who was appropriating urban youth black culture, right? So it always felt like it was a parody, rather than just an attack. And there are a lot of shows as well where you go, Fawlty Towers, I believe that in that German episode, the major also I think uses the N-word, I think, right?
Yeah.
Now
that was. Yeah,
sorry, go on.
That's the reason they banned it. Yeah. Well, they removed it from Netflix. Yeah. To go on.
Yeah, and so I think it wasn't just the German. I think it was a German thing. Andy talks about the West Indies, the cricket or something, or make some. Yeah. Now, again, there's two things there. You go. Firstly, you say that thing about intent and character, and you go. The major is clearly an old-fashioned bumbling.
That's right. Yeah.
Buffoon, right. So, but does that excuse the use of the word? And also we're judging by today's standards. Here's the other thing. We're talking about shows that Only Fools and Horses has had to have edits done to it from some of the earlier episodes. And the historical context, do you know what I mean? It's not a get out of jail free card, but it definitely has to be considered because I'm sorry, I was going to say, because I guarantee it as well in 30 years time. There'll probably be artists now where they'll be looking back and going, and do you know they ate meat? And people go, no, what? I'm not even listening to their work anymore or reading their books because I can't believe things change.
If you look at Alf Garnett, Garnett's character was written as the enemy. His character was completely written as the enemy. Right, there was a lot of humour in it, but the humour was at him attacking race, gay people, and whatever. And it was making a point. It was a statement.
Yes, it was.
These characters do exist in our society. We can take the mick out of them.
Yeah, it does. So go on. Just
take the piss out of it as well, make it almost mock it, because it's so ridiculous to be racist.
Well, that's kind of what I guess. Well, this is why I guess. Well, what I personally like about when it's people from their own culture doing that, like in hip hop, for example, African Americans will take the piss out of all these things sometimes. Because, for example, Ice Cube has a lyric about that where he's like, "Oh, white people call me an African American, like I know I'm black as this one." He's just talking about basically, he's saying that it's not up to white people to decide how he feels about something, and he's right. So the point being that it's up to, I think it should be up to the people themselves who are the target of things to say these things. It's not, again, this is the main thing. It's not up for. It shouldn't be. It'd be like if what's the equivalent if in Africa, I don't know how would it be? What would be the equivalent of that? Like basically, again, it's like, it's not, I think, if you're a part of the a group that's considered to be victimized, it's not necessarily your place to actually even defend it, even without understanding the context. So I think we should be asking people, we should be talking to more people, having dialogue. We should be asking black people who are part of what are called minority groups, anyone who's regarded as not the majority, asking them how they see comedy and how they see irony and all these things in order to get a more balanced perspective, right? Because I don't think it's that balanced. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's more.
But quite often, as well as the intent, it'll often be about who's the target, and is it punching down? Is it reinforcing a stereotype, or is it challenging a stereotype as well?
Agreed.
So there's a really interesting play called Comedians by Trevor Griffiths. It was a play. It was written in the I think it was first performed like something like 1977, and I've tried to get the rights for it before to put it on in Edinburgh and cast comedians in it, because it's a brilliant play, and it's about these working class comics who and it's so pertinent today as well. It's these working class comics who are having evening classes to learn to become comedians, and the guy who's about 60 something who's teaching them, this guy called Eddie Waters, is an ex-comedian, wartime comedian and stuff, but he always, his point is, he has this lovely quote where he says that comedy should be medicine, not sweets to rot their teeth with, right? And it's a really nice way of looking at it. And what happens is the basic story is the first act is them having their final preparations before they go down to this workingmen's club to perform their sets, and an agent has come up from London to come and watch them. He might pick a few of them for their books, and the third act is the aftermath of it. Now the agent is a proper old, he's an ex-comic as well, but he's like, just tell them what they want, like just take the piss out yourselves, but get the easy laughs. It's all about the laughs. It's all about the gags. And basically, like, the teacher's like, oh god, that's the worst person who could be reviewing you. And he's spent this whole time telling them how to use comedy as a force for good and how to be powerful with it. And then a couple of them change their act and try and sell out a bit, and they end up getting taken on by the agent, and the ones that sort of stay true don't. And it's a really interesting play, but it's just as relevant in a way to today, because there are easy and also I don't think that people and performers and acts from minorities should not be held to account for reinforcing stereotypes themselves, because as many sort of Chris Rocks and Richard Pryors and some of the brilliant black and particularly American acts we've seen over the years, there are some ones that are lazy and just do stuff where you go, oh, that is the laziest stereotype about. I've heard that so many times. Tell me something interesting about your culture and about your background. You know what I mean? Don't just go for the lazy options.
I agree.
So
everyone should be able to count.
Stereotype yourself. I agree. It's like, I mean that's kind of the joke of what I think. If you look at certain, like, and again, when it comes to Western music or Western culture, you can see how certain people will be so aggrandizing, so huge or whatever, or like so arrogant, they come across as like that, and people just take the piss out of them and think, are you being serious? And the question always comes down to, we can't always tell if an artist is being ironic, can we? Without
that's it, yeah.
They're not. They are.
That's kind of that's the ambiguous nature of irony, isn't it?
And of art generally. People, I think that it would be better if in the future we need to reach a point where we can look at art more objectively, and that's difficult. But that's hard.
Barry, I've got a question for you as a comedian. At what point do you think we can draw the line? Because I've always felt like censorship shouldn't really exist in comedy. But is there a point where, you know, it goes from, you know, being comedy into, you know, hate speech or something, you know, of that nature? Should there be any limits on freedom of speech in comedy?
Well, it sort of ties into to what we've just been talking about in a way, and about intent, because, you know, I've seen, you know, comics such as, you know, people ranging from like Jerry Sadowitz, who you know, who's a Glaswegian comedian magician, who he was a reaction against the whole sort of first wave of very politically correct comedy, and you know, and it all influences each other. But as much as you had sort of Ben Elton and some you know, and then you'd have your Mark Steele and Mark Thomas, and people doing like real sort of right on, hey, fuck Thatcher, sort of left, you know, and some really good work as well. But then you have someone like Sadowitz go along, I'm doing the opposite. I'm going to go out to be offensive. I'm going to go out to shock and offend. And Frankie Boyle, obviously, as
yeah.
well. And you go and you sort of, it's such a tricky one, because what I personally like feel like I can watch anything, and if it offends me, it might offend me because it's bad or because it's lazy. And if it was a horribly racist joke, I would be offended by it. You know, I'd be, if it was a disgustingly misogynistic, sexist joke. Again, I go, you know, a lot of, in terms of it partly comes down to taste, and it partly comes down to, obviously there are laws. You know what I mean, there are laws that you have to you know, adhere to in this country regarding free speech and hate speech.
Yeah, you can't just go on and just yell racist.
So where do you start? Yeah.
Sorry, and it's also it's sort of self-policing as well, in a sense. Not only from an audience, you know, you'd be okay if you turned up and did a you know, an EDL rally, or, you know, a UKIP meeting, you know, the sort of material that someone could get away with there, or call it material that could be seen as sort of racist or hateful. Maybe you get away with it, but a standard audience anywhere,
yeah, it's not going to.
They're not going to put up with it. And in a way, there is a slight, just, you know, amongst comedians and artists generally, are generally more left-leaning as a rule. Not all, you know, Hitler could paint, but, you know, but there, you know, but there are generally, you know, and that's why comedians like Jeff Norcott, who's a friend of mine, but he happens to be a conservative voting comedian. You know, he's done very well. He's a great comedian. He's done.
Yeah,
also, he's got an angle as well, and it's an interesting angle of being a conservative voting, Leave voting comedian. But from a working class background, but he's also very intelligent. He's an ex-teacher. He's very socially liberal. So it's, you know, there, but generally, but yeah, in terms of, I wouldn't like to say no, there are things that you shouldn't talk about, and because it depends on the quality of the joke and what it's showing up as well. You know, like I think someone can go on and do a perfectly funny bit of material about paedophilia, but they'd have to be very skilled, you know what I mean, at doing it rather than go for an easy joke. There's also an argument that if I'm being absolutely honest, and I think most comedians will say this as well, as most people would, there's a joke that you could be told behind closed doors, that you know is from a friend, and there's no baggage with it, and it's purely a joke that it might be knowingly awful or sick or whatever, that could be funny because it's so well constructed, but you wouldn't dream of saying it in public or on stage. And that isn't just because you go, I believe in these views. You're going, that is a well constructed, funny or sick joke, you know. But I wouldn't personally, I wouldn't say that on stage, because you know, when I first started out, I said just try slightly edgy stuff here and there, not edgy, but like a bit more confrontational. But especially when you're new and you're not skilled as a performer, people just go, all right, mate.
Yeah, Jim Jefferies is a typical example of a shock comedian, because he will come out with something and you'll be absolutely stunned and you'll laugh. Sometimes it's a nervous laugh, but actually, I think he's a genius. I love him.
Yeah, it's great.
Like you say, in 30 years' time.
but someone like Jim and to an extent, Bill Burr and Louis C.K. in a sort of different way, because Louis C.K. They all sort of play it to varying degrees, though, as don't. And Doug Stanhope is a very good example of that.
Doug Stanhope's brilliant, actually.
Yeah, they all play it slightly a bit like, but hey, don't listen to what I've got to say because I'm clearly a loser. So there's an angle of,
yeah, I'm a comedian. I'm not like a leader of people.
but also I'm a mess. Look at me, like particularly like Stanhope and Jim Jefferies.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, I'm going to say some offensive things. But what's interesting, and Bill Burr does this, and Jefferies does this as well, is, and Stanhope, that they might say something really, really shocking, but then you'll follow the logical steps to where they got there, or their own logic, and you sort of go into their world and see their point of view, and it makes a distinct style where you go, okay, so you're saying something like you want to have a child, I'm paraphrasing here, but a child with a woman who's terminally ill because you've always fancied being a father but don't want to be married or in a long-term relationship. So you go, it's quite a sick idea, but the way the logic from there, Walt's logic of how they got there, you follow. Do you know what I mean? Rather than like a newer, shocking open spot comedian who might just be going, hey, oh, abortions, wow, crazy, and you're like, ugh, you know, it's got to be an element of skill behind it as well.
Okay. There's context, and it's. Yeah, if it's actually clever as well.
Yeah, I think I think the other thing is that, it's really hard to know that line because like I've done that throughout stories at creative writing classes I've done where I'm not deliberately trying to be offensive. I'm just trying to do something that I thought was funny. But people should be able to read between the lines and tell when something's being, you know, taking the piss out of people who are being offensive, not just, you know what I mean?
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, I think in an ideal world you can just separate good comedy from bad comedy, you know. But again, it comes down to what you said about taste, you know.
Yeah, and it's all personal taste at the end of the day.
So
and also, what?
Or it's not, but then again, you know, there's many facets to that.
And that's subjective, yeah.
Yeah, it's subjective.
I mean, I think that dark comedies, then black comedy, or whatever, is useful if it makes like a point. So, you know, like the whole point of macabre comedy is like taking the piss out of things we don't want to think about, like Dr. Strangelove, which is an old 60s film, which you guys probably all know.
Oh,
yeah.
That's taking the piss out of nuclear war. That doesn't mean it supports nuclear war. However, it's different, of course, with the context of things that are very, very sensitive right now. I think it's just, I don't know. There are things that need to be thought about, like, for example, I don't know, including trigger warnings for certain people before a show would be quite good, and then just show it anyway. Better than not showing it. That I think would be quite good. Things like that, rather than, you know.
Yeah, I definitely agree with. I mean, it's difficult with something like stand-up where you go, okay, subjects that are being covered are, but there could be an overall warning of gone. Look, you know, you might be.
Recently, so some guy, I don't remember his name, unfortunately, but it was something on like literally like a few months ago, and he's literally being so sexist about women, but unbelievably, I found it offensive. I was like, this is stupid. What is the point? It's just this guy's just being an idiot. Like in this, he was trying to portray himself as a stupid man being sexist in order to be.
You get people like that. Obviously, like Steve Coogan when he was doing his stand-up and doing Paul Carf and Pauline Carf and all those sort of characters. He was actually just lampooning like elements of society. And I think we have to have that. I think comedy has to kind of have that sort of thing where we are laughing at aspects of our own failures, if you like.
Yeah. The risk that the comedian's taking, that's why I've always respected comedians, because they are totally exposing their thoughts and jokes to a group of people they've never met.
Stand-up,
especially. And it's like, the risk is people might even end up just taking the piss out of you.
So
the way comedy has changed, Barry, is in the 70s, obviously, before we had the internet and mass television, all the comedians used to trawl around all the clubs and tell the same set for a whole year, right? Because it was a new audience, and nothing was being televised.
Longer, yeah.
Yeah, but exactly. And nowadays, obviously, with television and the internet, the gags are there. So comedians are continually having to write, right? So do you think that this has affected the shelf life of a comedian, being that you yourself, you're a stand-up comedian, if you write a set and it goes online, everyone in the world potentially knows the punchline to your gags. So you've always got to be on point. You've always got to be writing.
Yeah, again, it's a real interesting one, and there'll be a range of comics on the circuit from people who change their bits of their stuff up every few months, and then some people who are almost doing word for word and have done for 10-15 years, right? Now, again, it's more of a problem if you're famous, obviously, because if you're famous, you've got lots of fans and you're doing a solo show. So if you do that show and you tour it and then it goes out, it used to be as a DVD, obviously not as popular these days, but if it goes out online somewhere or on Netflix or even on YouTube, then you're stuffed because you've got actual fans who will come to see your work. Interestingly though, I always think with comics, and sometimes you'll have a bit, if you're doing like a big weekend club, and most comics would say this as well, you'll have some set bits or some banker bits that are going to work because you're going, it's a weekend club, you've got to keep attention with 300-400 people. You also want to do as good as you can do at that gig, because it's a nice weekend club that might pay well, and you want to do that. You want to do it more regularly. So it's not the time for experiments or new stuff, brand new stuff. So it depends. Some people, like someone like Tom Stade, a brilliant Canadian comic, sometimes he'll do a 20-minute set for a year and a half, and then almost change it completely to another 20-minute set. Other people, I find I have bits that sort of poke in and bits that expand and other bits drop out, and then it sort of evolves more. And sometimes an old bit might come back because you realise it's a topper on top of a new bit you've written. Go, oh, I know what would go as a line in the middle there, and I'll take that little bit out, and that keeps it fresh and exciting in its own way. I've also seen comics who change their material too quickly, and it does take sometimes a while to get that story or even gag the time, even if it's a one sentence gag. It might be just rearranging a word or a pause in a different place that suddenly one night, oh, that's what it was missing. It was why it's gone from getting a 6 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10 reaction or whatever. It's just that slight bit of wording or a gesture, a little look or whatever. So the material evolves, and the performance sort of and the material evolve symbiotically, if you like, without being too positive about it.
Someone I really admire as a comedian is Tim Vine.
Yeah,
right? He's completely family friendly. It's all pretty much one-liners.
And Milton Jones, very similar.
And Milton Jones,
style.
of course, yeah, exactly, yeah. And he's a Canadian guy who's also very
Stuart
similar.
Stuart
Francis, yeah.
Yeah, he swears a bit more, but Gary Delaney is another one. I'm in awe of those, because they are. I mean, I've seen every one of them apart from Stuart Francis. I've only worked with once, but I've seen the other guys. I've seen them all die as well on their asses, because if an audience weren't up for that style and there's nowhere to go from there, at the same time, when an audience go with it and it's on form, then that just relentless barrage of one-liners is I find hugely impressive.
Yeah, and it's difficult for them to remember them all. I mean, Tim Vine is incredible, isn't he? Really. He had the record, I think.
He did at one point, for the most jokes in an hour, was it?
Yeah, and he won the Perrier Award for this joke, which is brilliant. I went on one of those once in a lifetime holidays. Never again. And that's why I love him.
Well, there's basically, we've only got about 5 minutes left, and we're aware of time, but there's a couple of more questions I had for you, Barry. So one was, this might actually be the last one, but down time, but basically, how do you see it like with regard to things like cartoons? I know that from what I've heard, they've gotten less trouble generally, haven't they? Do you think that's because of the less realism of the medium? Like, The Simpsons or Family Guy, they seem to get away with a lot more, and it seems to be reason to people. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Really interesting. I was thinking a minute ago, and when we were talking about it, saying something like South Park, for example, and not only South Park, the TV series, but also their other works. Book of Mormon obviously is a musical, but there's a song about a baby being fucked, in it. There's the Team America, which I think is probably might be the funniest film I've ever seen, or certainly my top 3. Yeah. But when you look at it again, you look at something now. Team America is it's sort of having to go at everyone, including the do-gooding sort of Hollywood liberal elites and whatever. But South Park, you go, there are some borderline things there. Now again, I think firstly it comes down to intent. I remember a whole South Park episode where there was someone who'd grown a tumour out the side of their head, or became a teacher, and then the rest of the town all decided to wear these hats that had tumours coming out the side of their head. and it actually made a beautiful point, because at the end of it, she was going, I don't want you all to do that. I want someone to be accepted for me. I don't want you to try and be like me, And you go, and quite often there'll be an interesting point at the end of it. And I do think you're right. I do think there's probably a thing of it being a step away from reality, and its very nature of being a cartoon that helps and allows you. But the Family Guy has been pretty full on in some episodes over the years in terms of taste. But
Simpsons got away with a lot in their Halloween episodes, and because of the way it was done, it ends up working better. I think maybe it's because it's easier to tell when they're being ironic, actually. And that sounds strange, but I think maybe that's true.
I think with the cartoon, given that it's all
you can sense irony more in a cartoon, for whatever reason, because it's more obvious that cartoons are ironic by nature.
From the beginning, this isn't to be taken too seriously.
Yeah.
The Simpsons have always been in a way less offensive because they've always bridged the genuine, the genius of it as well is that they've managed to make it funny for kids and adults at the same time.
Yeah.
Whereas you wouldn't show kids South Park, necessarily, or not for a certain age.
That's all
I
right.
actually showed my nephew when he was about 8. My nephew Alex. He asked to watch Team America, and I'd never seen it. And I thought, I knew it was kind of an adult film. And he said, "Oh, no, I've watched it with my dad." So I put it on, and as I was watching, I was thinking, he's definitely not watched this with his dad. Anyway, we enjoyed the whole film, which is a brilliant film. It's extremely funny.
Hilarious.
And the next day, when I handed him back to his parents, his captors, he told them, and my sister-in-law phoned me up and said, I've just Googled Team America and I've been watching some of it, and I think it's highly inappropriate that you're showing it to my son. And I was like, well, he told me that he watched it with my brother. And she said, you've been done over by an 8-year-old.
Yeah. And she's right.
Yeah.
I think that's what I like about. In a way, it has to be. I think that's the other thing. I think we have to touch upon this another time. But I do think, it'd be interesting to explore the whole thing about the relationship between adults and kids, and the extent to which they influence their kids to watch certain things, and whether that's a good thing. My parents showed me Dune when I was 5, which may not have been the best thing to see a 5-year-old, given it has a lot of violence in it. But it was, because it's science fiction, it was different, I guess. Or but even Star Wars, actually, for a kids thing, is actually really violent at times. It gets away with it.
Scary.
They use the fancy and sci-fi element to get away with that, when it works. And I think this is why genre is really interesting, because genre allows you to explore things from different angles.
Yeah, I think you make a great point about animation, because I think South Park just does the most. Because it takes the piss out of everything indiscriminately. That to me is perfect, because it doesn't focus on one group. It just takes.
That's
piss
why
out
it works
everything.
well. That's why no one gets.
And it makes it funny. Isn't it better to laugh at the ridiculous shit?
Well,
but then,
go on.
I was just going to say, sorry, but someone like Bernard Manning would argue that he took the piss out of everyone, of all races and of all, but again, you go. Yeah, but it doesn't feel like that, and I think I think that Trey Stone and Matt Parker, that's their names, isn't it? Trey Parker, Matt Stone. Sorry, I thought it didn't sound right. Whereas I think again, everyone sort of knows their shtick in the same way as with someone like Frankie Boyle as well. People go, yeah, but he does it. He sort of attacks the government. He does, and he's sort of, pro civil rights. And he seems quite sort of left of centre. Whereas if that was a right wing comic doing, that some of the offensive stuff that the Frankie Boyle's done, I think that it would be a lot harder for people to accept.
I saw a lovely interview of Frankie Boyle, and they said to him, a lot of your humour's offensive. He said, well, I've been teetotal for about 10 years. You should have seen what my stuff was like before I stopped drinking. Which is fair enough, isn't it, really?
But just quickly, and I find Frankie Boyle brilliant. I think he's hilarious. But he was doing a thing once about Alex Salmond, the old Scottish MP, who's now since been charged and exonerated of various charges. But he looked really ill, and it was the election before last, and he was just and he was saying he said something like he looks so ill. His hamsters bought a suit for his funeral, and it's just the idea that a hamster only lives. It just really made me giggle. As a joke, it was sort of slightly dark but silly at the same time.
Yeah. I think Frankie Boyle also made a point that he makes jokes that bring certain topics into context, and maybe that's a good thing as a way of softening the blow of it being
that's
quite
very
serious.
important. Putting topics into context is very important.
Yeah.
And so we're going to finish in a second, but I was wondering if you guys, Nick, have any final questions, and if there's anything more you want to say, Barry, because this has been very interesting and it's been really cool.
Fantastic.
Indeed, thank you, Barry. Been marvellous to have you on board.
No worries. Always good. Really interesting, and there's more to be looked at. Chat another time about the psychology and how that can be used though as a performer.
Definitely.
In terms of creatively, in terms of character motivations, and how you're dealing in a relationship with an audience, because there's a whole status issue as well of where you pitch that. With an audience, because if you come on and they see it, then they're like a pack, you know what I mean, and they'll sense that you're nervous, and it's like a pack of animals where you see. So it's an interesting.
Very well put. Yeah.
Well, we'll definitely have you back, Barry. You've been absolutely marvellous tonight. I think
nice to see you.
Indeed, marvellous. And when you're back on the circuit, I'll come and see you. Say hello to Daniela if you bump into her.
Will do. Yeah,
indeed, mate. Thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing some of your stuff in the future.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Excellent meeting you.
Take care, Barry.
No problem. Cheers, guys.
Cheers,
See you later.
Barry.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Yeah. Oh, look at our PM. He came out and took the piss out of people who wear burqas.
Yeah.
And he's our Prime Minister.
Okay.
Yeah. I wouldn't use him as a moral barometer though.
He is actually like a stand-up comedian, though, isn't he? Really?
Yeah, bad.
But every time you hear him speak, it's not like you're in disbelief.
But he's a prime example, though. He's a prime example of the type. And again, it's not every performer, every comic, or every world leader, but he definitely falls into that category of "Please love me." Right? He was bullied when he was younger. When he was 12 or 13 or so, and he was moved around lots of different schools because of his dad's work. His dad was often away or he's often busy, and and so you look into the sort of become a cod psychologist and go, well, that's obvious then. And he then decided to change his name to Boris, which is his middle name. He's Alexander, isn't it? His actual name. And start there and grow his hair a bit longer and be a buffoon, and suddenly realized, oh, I can make people laugh. Clearly also very intelligent, no doubt about that. And then has been single-mindedly just gone for like, a student union president, like, mayor of London. It's been a constant wanting to sort of prove himself at all costs. This is a guy who hadn't even made this decision on whether he wanted to leave Europe or stay. Had written 2 different articles, one for staying, one for leaving. So that's how, and then suddenly his conviction politics, because that's what's ended up getting him into power. So he's of that sort of always, he's proving something. And there are definitely certain people.
He was great on Have I Got News For You, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, compared to, I think it's always a bit like when there's a football player or manager and people go, oh my God, look at the personality on him. And you go, only because the rest are so boring and like robots, that he stands out because he's not being an identikit politician, maybe. Yeah, I think probably always helped him.